Recording in progress.
Okay. So I guess we'll get started. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. I want to thank our gracious hosts here at the Shoreline YMCA for this invitation. I'm looking very much so to expand on this education series to get more information out there to our community. So we can jump right in. For those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Markovich. I'm the owner and founder of Better Ways LLC. So we started in 2019 as a cannabis-centric education center. We were one of the first here on the Shoreline. So I will get into some of that. I am a Brantford native. My mother is a Brantford native. I personally use cannabis for pain management and nerve damage. At the end of 2018, the Farm Bill Act federally legalized hemp and CBD products. And that was sort of the advent of everybody seeing the explosion of products all over the internet and grocery stores and gas stations. And you saw those three letters on everything. But as we well know, not all CBD and cannabis is ubiquitous, doesn't come from all the same sourcing. So it's really important to understand, a fair amount, and which is why we wanted to have today's presentation. So as I said, we began in 2019. We were one of the first locations, brick and mortar, on the Shoreline to focus on these things here in Connecticut. We have graciously earned and received the Connecticut Best on the Shoreline accolade. We opened in 2019 and 2020. The Best Alternative Medicine Hemp CBD Store accolade was created to address the sort of introduction of all of these companies and institutions. And we have placed top 3 for the last 5 years. Since then, we have expanded our efforts outside of just the brick and mortar. We've joined the Shoreline Chamber of Commerce. We were inducted as a board member to the Connecticut Small Business Chamber, the Connecticut Cannabis Small Business Alliance, excuse me. And we have increased our network. I do a lot of activism and advocacy in the recreational and medical space here in Connecticut, DC, Massachusetts, and beyond. And that activism efforts are with Connecticut's homegrown group called the Connecticut Canna Warriors. Very proud to be a member with them and all the hard work they do, especially this legislative session. So that is a little bit about us. And now I wanted to kind of briefly walk everybody through the history of this plant, mostly with a focus on the US. So this plant's older than us. It's over 12,000 years old. When we were, fledgling colonies, there was a law that said if you owned a certain acreage of land, you had to grow industrial hemp. And that was to help with textiles and clothes. But the big thing was the shipping industry. Hemp was turned into rope, sails, sealants called jute, and a bunch of other applications were used industrially at the time. Feedstock for animals, and then the healthy molecules that help us are then upcycled into our food stream. So one of my favorite quotes from Jefferson is about hemp and how important it is to our country. They knew back then hundreds of years ago. There were very well established hemp plantations here in New England. Um, Historically, not many people know that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are written on hemp paper, which, much like papyrus, it's a different material, and the preservation of the documents is, elongated. Um, Nowadays, hemp threading is in our money as an anti-terror or anti-counterfeiting device. You can see it in a bill. It's like little tiny hairs of blue, and that shows up in the actual money as well. So we'll fast forward a little bit to the 1800s. Prior to its a federal act that made everything illegal, cannabis was one of the top three ingredients in over half of the medicines out on the market in the 1800s, the latter half of that century. There was, I think, over 2,000 medicines patented by well over 200 companies at the time. And this just goes to show how plant-based medicines are really predominantly beneficial for us. But once again, that comes with education and sourcing and trust. So at the time, ailments like pain, muscle spasms, stomach cramps, etc., were remedied and fixed with a lot of these products and medicines that were out on the market at that time. Much of cannabis's introduction into Western medicine can be associated with Dr. William O'Shannessy. He was an Irish physician in the 1800s. He was inducted into the Medical Society in Calcutta. And so while he was in India, he was exposed to cannabis and he began experimenting and researching with its benefits, especially as an anesthesia prior to surgery. Then we get to 1937, in which the Marijuana Prohibition Act was established, unfortunately, and that was done in great haste. Harry Anslinger was the head of, at the time, what was considered the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. And so he made a very brief presentation to Congress at the time. It was about 30 minutes long. And he focused heavily on marijuana's proliferation through the United States because of jazz music and how he personally felt it was a great danger and risk to the preservation of the American way and the safety of white Christian women, I think was the exact quote. So very quickly, Congress made it illegal, also to the delight of many industries that were threatened at the time by the advancement of industrial hemp and cannabis itself. And we look at big pharma, we look at the newspaper tycoons at the time, William and Hearst, to name some people who had interest in timber for the paper, for the newspapers, pharmaceuticals, the automobile industry and petroleum was feeling threatened. The year that this act was initiated, Henry Ford had created a car built out of industrial hemp that also ran on an alternative hemp fuel. And he was starting a crop sharing program for those in Detroit that had limited land, but it was just grow industrial hemp on your property. He would pick it up, he would process it, and over time you would grow your own car. So you can see how this might have threatened some people within the automobile industry, even though he was in it already and innovating and looking for a cleaner, brighter future. During the early 1900s, Popular Mechanics evaluated the industrial hemp industry at over $1 billion back then, and that was prior to the stock market crash. So you can see how external interests can unfortunately influence later. Now, thankfully, we fast forward a little bit further. I didn't want to go through all the nitty gritty, but here we are now in 2025. You can see much of our country has come back online, back on board, supporting recreational or medical cannabis in some form. There's a few states that are decriminalized and still figuring it out. And then, of course, we have some major states that is still illegal. We hope the landscape will continue to grow and progress. At the federal level, we were hoping for descheduling that would remove cannabis completely from the DEA's scheduling list of substances. Ideally, we much within the community, we hope to see that this plant gets governed by the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health. This is a perishable crop, and ideally, it should be treated and packaged as such. And then we get to the lovely endocannabinoid system. So this is how and why all this works. You can think of this as a lock and key system within our bodies. So this system is inherent in our physiology. It developed in an evolutionary capacity as our species evolved and we interacted with plant-based medicines as we explored the continents. You can think of this system simply as a network of receptors that interacts with molecules we naturally produce to promote what's called homeostasis or head-to-toe balance. And things like our water intake, our exercise, our food, the amount of alcohol we have, the amount of sleep we have, environmental stressors at home and work, these are factors that will impact the very subtle nuances of the molecules we produce that interact with this system. There are many receptor types in this system, but the two main ones that you see here, the CB1 receptor is located predominantly in our neural tissue, throughout the nervous system, and along our spinal column. The CB2 receptor is located under our tongues, throughout the entire GI tract, very densely populated in our upper intestine, and then our extremities and our skin are responsible for also absorbing some of these molecules. So what's beautiful about this, these receptors also are strategically located on the majority of our major bodily functions. So, it's easy to see how this network and system can have direct impact on how we operate every day. So there are there's a little bit of confusion as to what cannabis is. So I brought some visual aids. So this is the plant material, which defines cannabis itself. The amount of THC, which is the psychoactive chemical in this plant, will determine, do we call this marijuana or do we call it hemp? For all intents and purposes, it is the same plant with all the same molecules. Different proportions will cause it to be classified differently. So in the US, if the THC content is below 0.3%, then this is classified as federally legal hemp. It's not intoxicating, and yet it still has all the healing parts of the plant. If it's over that threshold in the US, then we call it marijuana. And that is an example of a cannabis product that has enough THC to have a psychoactive reaction and get you high. So on the outside of this circle are the 10 major cannabinoids. There are over 120 in this plant. Each one has a singular or multiple medicinal value to it. What's beautiful about these 10 is they are extremely powerful and they have a lot of beautiful overlaps. CBD is predominantly known for its anti-inflammatory properties, but it also helps as an antidepressant, a sleep aid, a muscle relaxant, relieves spasms, and inhibits tumor cell growth, kills cancer cells, and the like. I do want to preface that I am not a licensed medical professional, and that much of the research and claims in this presentation and in this industry are not evaluated by the FDA. So I do have to say that. But from personal anecdotal evidence, as well as the many people that I've worked with since we opened, much of the benefits are very apparent and obvious. But it does take a little bit of self-experimentation to see for yourself. So the next component of this plant, the raw plant material, in the cannabis industry, it's called terpenes. So on the left, you can see the flavors and smells and scents and tastes that we are familiar with. On the right-hand side are the technical chemical names of what we're used to. And I bring this up because each essential oil has one or many medicinal properties, and it is the terpene profile which determines the more colloquial terms that people are used to in the cannabis industry when you hear the term sativa or indica. Sativa strains are much more uplifting and have much of the citrusy and lemon and pine and sweet flavors and smells to them. And when you find what those benefits are, a lot of it is uplifting. On the converse side, indica, couch, those terpene profiles are more floral, more earthy, and they can have sedative effects or increase appetite, which is beneficial for those dealing with cancer and the compounding side effects of chemo and radiation and the impact on one's appetite. But you need to intake those calories in order to keep healing. So that's why cannabis is shown to be very beneficial for those in that process in their journey. We now have the next slide discusses delivery mechanisms, and there are a few. There is no delivery mechanism that is superior over the other. It's more of what the personal preference is, as well as what we are trying to alleviate and or focus on. So for inhalation, that includes cannabis flower, which I had held up. Concentrates are examples of cannabis flower that through either a natural or chemical process, everything gets concentrated, and that can be in the form of hash rosin or hash, shatter. There's a few terms out there, but basically it's a concentrated form that can be inhaled through a water pipe or an electronic device. The benefits of inhalation is it's rapid onset. So if somebody is having perhaps an anxiety attack or something that needs a little bit quicker alleviation, the inhalation mechanism is going to hit you quickly, but also subsequently it's going to fade the first in terms of duration. Then we have edibles and tinctures. So here is some of our local honey as an example. And we have our tincture line as well. Those are usually oil-based in recipe design. So fats are, cannabis is a fat-soluble molecule, and it binds really well to fats. So when you're taking an edible or a tincture, understand it's going to take a little bit of time to digest and metabolize and get uploaded into your system. That's also why instructions on proper dosage instructions on edibles are really important. so that people don't potentially get in over their heads. If you take an edible and you don't notice anything, and then you take more of it, and then the first round kicks in, and then the second round kicks in. And we'll get into dosage, appropriate dosage protocols in a moment. Third, suppositories are very, very helpful and effective. Many people cannot smoke. In certain instances, their GI tract is not available as well. But to deal with things like pain or sleep or stress or anxiety or stomach issues, the suppository option is really helpful in working with females as well. Any issues with menstrual concerns or birth pain or during pregnancy, consulting with the physician can prove to have some relief outside of the regular pharmaceutical capacity. And also endometriosis has been, like, specifically, we've worked with several individuals in the community that seem to get much relief from cannabis, and that's very promising. So it's a debilitating condition. I hope no one has to deal with that. Lastly, for a delivery mechanism, we have topicals. Here's are some of the examples of our topical line. This is a local beeswax base out of Indian Neck. This is also the same sourcing as our honey. And topicals are great for spot treatment. Where you apply those is where it's going to go to work. So anything like tennis elbow or an arthritic wrist or the neck or a bum knee, topicals are great for, in tandem with products that you ingest internally. What we have found, and personally what I found with my pain management regimen, is any product that you ingest, it's going to systemically apply. So while my focus is pain and nerve damage in my left leg, this will help alleviate things in the rest of my body that I am or may not be aware of becoming problematic. So a few terms that are important to understand in this industry. First and foremost is the entourage effect. So when nature is the perfect scientist, the research and development has already been done. Thousands and thousands of years this plant's evolved and changed and developed its own survival mechanisms. So in chemistry, the entourage effect discusses how all the healing parts of the plant working together synergistically as a team is going to make one of these cannabis products that much more efficient and effective for the user. So when going from the raw plant material to one of these manufactured products, the first level is full spectrum. As you can see, that's all the parts, the terpenes and the cannabinoids are present. So you're getting all the healing power possible of the plant. Next is broad spectrum, which is all the healing parts minus any of the THC. And those products are exemplary in working with the youth. If there's a concern of any THC with a minor, we've successfully worked with many middle school students that had to deal with unforeseen levels of anxiety and depression during the pandemic and distance learning and all of the societal implications that happened with that. And we were very grateful that our broad spectrum products were helpful. And again, as a parent, as a primary care physician, that's really helpful to know there's no THC in this product that could potentially negatively impact the mental development of a child, but at the same time, they're equally getting all the healing parts of the plant. This was very, very helpful for us. And then finally, an isolate product is any one of the 120 in the plant. So Our topical is an example of a CBD only design product. But any cannabis product can have it could be just CBN, which is helpful for sleep. CBG is good for memory and focus. So really any one of those molecules can be put and become a designer product, so to speak. Personally, I tend to stay away from products, from ingesting products that have just a singular molecule in them, much like you don't want to lean too heavy on Tylenol or aspirin. It's going to have the same over time effect on your kidneys and liver. So personally, the more of the healing properties of the plant that are present in the product, I think it's going to have a better interaction with our body. Okay, so often many times people ask me, what am I going to feel? What am I gonna experience? And that's really up to the individual. This is a hyper individualized experience. Everybody here could take the same gummy and have 6 different experiences. So understanding that what works for somebody else may not work for you, or vice versa. And that's why that journey with somebody who's educated and in this field is really important. We've always advocated for responsible consumption, whether that's a non-intoxicating hemp derived CBD product or higher THC products that can be found in the dispensaries. I always recommend somebody trying something new. Start slow and low. You can always take more. It's really hard to take less. And as is with anything, knowledge, that's why we opened our store. The education component of this, as you understand, there's a few things to learn. But it's really important to be working alongside an individual or a company that is aligned with the same intentions. So knowing what's ailing you, what might be wrong in your daily or weekly rhythm. Is it a physical concern? Is it a mental concern? Once you have a better understanding of what's going on with yourself, then how you present that to somebody within the industry to make good recommendations is really important, and helps the conversation of transparency. So, as with anything, there are cautions. So what I've found to be helpful in my experience and journeys traveling to other states and other dispensaries is ask a lot of questions. And if you get a vibe that the industry representative isn't on game, or you might want to rethink who you're working with or giving your money to or where you're getting your products, I think it's important that those in the industry who are advocating for somebody else use cannabis themselves. Not to say that somebody who doesn't use it isn't just as well knowledgeable and well versed, but I think that level of trust is going to be deepened if you're speaking to somebody who also uses cannabis and has their own personal experiences. So going back to the psychoactive interaction from THC, it's really important to also understand what your medical history looks like. There are incidents of those, whether they're using recreational cannabis or getting their medical marijuana prescriptions. The components of mental health are hard to understand. So THC can have a negative interaction with those who have an incidence of mental health issues, or perhaps are on medication for a mental health issue. So making sure you have a very transparent conversation with your primary care physician or one of these cannabis industry professionals is really important to make sure there's not a bad experience down the road. That transparency is also important when it comes to food allergies. There are certain standards in the cannabis industry. Tinctures, for example, can be made with coconut oil, hemp seed oil, grape seed oil. So making sure people don't have food allergies with those or any of the adaptogens that are added into these products is important as well. So here in Connecticut, again, I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't educating my community. So one of the things that a lot of advocates and activists have been concerned about in Connecticut is the safety of the cannabis in the dispensaries. So just to go through the historical shifts, um, adult use possession began in July 1st of 2021, and it wasn't until the beginning, I would say, third week of January of 22 that adult recreational sales began. At the time, our Department of Consumer Protection increased the allowable limits of mold and bacteria in our medical marijuana program to millions of allowable parts of colony forming units of mold and bacteria on the raw plant. This was a big concern of ours as to why they were increasing the limits to what they are now, therefore placing Connecticut into the highest allowable limit threshold in the country, along with a few other states. When that shift happened, the 54,000 medical patients at the time were not alerted to those safety shifts. And that was telling to a lot of us in the industry and community. That would be like if there was an E. coli outbreak in a grocery store on the lettuce and nobody got alerted or products to be removed and stuff. So again, public safety is a big concern of ours. The caveat with these shifts is that because it's not federally legal, the FDA doesn't govern the safety standards for this plant, and each state can choose how they fix poorly grown flower, and that comes in the form of remediation, in which the plant material can be soaked in ozone or microwaved and then tested, and then it goes to the shelves. Also, our state has suggested recent legislature to allow double remediation. So if your product fails first, you can zap it again and then it goes to the shelves. So that would be like eating food that started as spoiled, but then was remediated. Therefore, it's okay. So much of what's occurring may or may not be in the best interest of the people actually using this plant. So what we can do to protect ourselves, I always recommend when you go into a dispensary or some kind of cannabis store that you request what's called a certificate of analysis or a COA for your product. These are the usually third-party lab tested results that will go into the cannabinoid and terpene proportions and ratios, what those are going to come out as a percentage. But these tests also look for heavy metals and pesticides and mold and bacteria and powdery mold and so forth. So ensuring that your paperwork, as they say, show me the receipts, that your paperwork is actually exemplary of a high quality cannabis product. And so having an employee at one of those places or their management be, those documents should be readily available and equally easily explainable. That snaps into the trust I was talking about. It is paramount for this industry to grow due to transparency and best intentions for the community and the patients that are using these products. It's really important that every customer facing member is aware of where the products are sourced from, how they're harvested, extracted, stored, packaged, and what's coming down the pipe. Are there any advances that prolong safer storage? Are there better testing opportunities? Are there cheaper testing opportunities? And much of these foci are influenced by political interests and new legislation. So I also think that those in the industry should be on top of it and understanding what decisions are going to be molding and shaping their industry, because ultimately it impacts the patients that are using these products. So I want to thank everybody for today, for coming. You can find us in downtown Brantford. You can visit our website to check out the products that we have. You can certainly call or text us to schedule an appointment or to come visit the store, because of the activism work that we do when the legislative session is in play. Sometimes our store hours aren't always congruent with Google, so calling ahead will certainly ensure that we're open. We are present on Instagram and Facebook through Better Ways LLC. And if anybody has any questions at all, I don't know, out there in internet land or or in the room, but I'm here for it. And I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, that's great.
Yeah.
In the dispensary, if you ask for a certificate, what it would be like a red flag to look for? In the moment, someone's gonna,
Yeah.
get.
I think if a employee asks you what a certificate of analysis even is, that's a big red flag.
Sure.
If the product doesn't have a scannable QR code, which I do believe is Connecticut law at this point, or again, like if you get the vibe that that employee or the management or that establishment just is kind of fumbling the question, or I mean, I've done secret shopping at dispensaries and I've asked the very same thing, and they go, oh well, here's the THC level and here's our terpenes. That's not what I'm asking for. That's a part of it,
Yeah.
to know what levels those are, but that's not the full story. I want to know where the mold came in. I want to know how this is showing up in a full panel test. And again, if there are those of you out there who don't know how to read these tests, happy to help. If they're not complicated, but to have an employee or a manager or some staff member not know how to direct you to that, that would be a big red flag in my opinion.
To kind of follow up on that, one of your slides, you had said to ask questions.
Yes.
To what would be some questions that you would want?
So again, how I said, if the industry representative uses cannabis themselves, that very question: do you use cannabis? Why do you use it? And this is a very community centric plant in industry, and it's needed community protection for 6 decades because of all of this. And within those relationships, that is where you find, I would say that the better intentions, if you build that rapport with that individual, if you get to, understanding maybe they do, maybe they don't, maybe it's a family member that does, asking them, what products do you have that others have gotten the similar relief I'm looking for? going on a company's Google reviews and combing through that as well, questions could pop up there. Um, it's much different than going to your 15-minute primary care physician's appointment, you know. Um, and unfortunately, sometimes some of these establishments don't have more than 15 minutes to assess or intake or answer your questions and stuff. And I find that to be very problematic, especially when people are converting from pharmaceutical and shifting into, well-sourced cannabis products. So those are important things. Understanding where the company's direction, who runs it, why they even opened, why they share the same affinity with this plant. But really, I would say ask any and all questions that make you feel more comfortable.
For
Okay.
some, oh, I'm
Sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
I was just going to ask for someone who is just starting out
Mhm.
experimenting.
Yes.
What would you recommend that someone starts out with? Would it be flour? Would it be a tincture? Would it be?
That then goes back to personal preference. If somebody's comfortable with smoking cannabis, I would caution them to understand that today's cannabis is much more potent than the cannabis of even a few years ago, let alone the 70s and 80s and 90s. The genetics have certainly been pumped up to create more robust strains. So it really depends on what a person's personal experience is. If they've never used cannabis, if they used cannabis a while ago, if they're just getting back into it. But I would say if they want to smoke cannabis and they don't want to get too high, smokable hemp flower is a good compromise. You will feel very good, but again, as I said, you're going to get intoxicated because the threshold of THC is so low. Full spectrum hemp and CBD products are I would say, in the middle of the road. You're going to get that mental and physical relaxation without too much of a high. So for those trying to experiment and kind of ease their way back into it, whether it's a tincture or a gummy, but those I think would be acceptable options to sort of experiment in a safer space. And then certainly once you generate your own individualized comfortability with that product, then you can certainly increase the amount you're using for the desired effects. Cannabis is used as needed because it's so individualized. So having the peace of mind that the product that you are using is safe and clean and tested, as well as you can then learn what to expect when you experience the product a few times over.
So on that certificate of analysis, if they remediate it, does that show up in there?
No,
So,
not at this moment. It's a safe bet to assume. This might be a rough number, but I would say 90% of the products in Connecticut, especially raw flour. That's because of the limited licensing in the state, as well as the scale of operations that the existing licensees have decided to embark on. So there are these issues of mold and bacteria and powdered mildew because there are too many plants in too big of a room. There isn't much of a focus on small batch or craft, it's more of volume production and getting it out there. And when you grow this plant that way and you don't necessarily respect the botany limits, then you run into some of these issues. So I feel, and many of those in the Connecticut industry and beyond feel that those allowable limits of mold and bacteria were increased in order to placate the current operators who are just mass producing cannabis for the volume and not necessarily the quality. So while your certificate of analysis doesn't say it's remediated, it's usually a safe bet, and that actually is a good question to ask at the dispensary. Do you guys know which products have been remediated or not? And I'm going to say 95% will currently, unfortunately. So thankfully, we have home grow in our state, and thankfully, this legislative session, the language for a caregiver program is being welcomed, and that looks it's been modeled after Maine's program. And what that allows an industry to do is that a medical marijuana patient can then request to be assigned to a medical marijuana caregiver. They pay a fee to the state, and then that caregiver is authorized to grow specific strains of cannabis for their medical patients. Unlike what's occurring now is that strain might not be profitable for the existing operator to grow, or there's not much of a demand from them for it. So the existing infrastructure of cultivators who care about the plant and they care about having a very deep interpersonal relationship with their patients in the plant, this will provide a infrastructure to fill the gaps where the existing regulated infrastructure is losing medical patients. So we're hoping this will be an adopted mechanism to save our medical program and get higher quality and safer meds out to those in need.
Is mold only found on plants that are grown inside?
No. So mold and bacteria are naturally occurring on living organisms. The concern is the types, and the concern is the concentration. So there are many cannabis scientists, lab technicians, lab directors that have a lot of compelling information out there as to what may or may not be acceptable or safe or the type. Personally, I grow my cannabis outside because that's where plants do their best. And when you have a cultivator who has limited plants, they have more time and care and attention to say that plant's getting sick, that plant is beyond recognition and needs to be removed and destroyed. This is the problem with relying on remediation to fix a room. You know, you could have half the room covered in visible mold, and then they remediate it because they want to save that profit share, versus like any farmer would do with food, or in a greenhouse. Any grower would simply take that diseased or sick plant and destroy it, as it should be, because we're not going to save our moldy tomatoes to bring to the grocery store. So there are operating standards that are still being ironed out. Those that love and respect this planting community, I feel, are leading the pack and leading by example. And those that are just looking to make a buck are the ones that are creating a lot of these industry problems.
Connecticut has how many growers right now?
Currently, there are 7 licensed cultivators. We have more dispensaries than growers and few manufacturers. So it's kind of a cart before the horse problem where I don't feel the infrastructure was designed sustainably. There's obviously much room for growth and improvement, but that will be determined by our legislators and how much they're willing to listen to common sense, the community, the medical patients, the activists. But I do feel they are listening this session. And again, we all know there's plenty of space in this industry for everybody. But while there are patients being harmed and not having the appropriate care or access to this plant-based medicine, we have to work very hard to change that reality. Because the entire intention of legalizing this plant is for those to get relief. So how can we say we're doing a good job if our very medical patients aren't being serviced the way that? So I am hopeful over the next few months to see some radicalized improvements. Does anybody online have any questions at all? Okay.
Thank you, Duncan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Very
thank you.
much. This was fun.
Thank
And,
you, everybody.
I used Dunkin' CBD oil in my massage practice and it's incredible. Like I'm talking like within 5 minutes, like instant pain relief. It absorbs in the skin really nice and my clients love it. You know what I mean? Like I'm always referring people to.
And likewise, I wanna make sure people get access to your expertise and knowledge and care and
Thank you.
all the amazing things that you do as a healer. Again, this plant isn't a cure. It is a good example of another management tool for balance. And when you adopt a tool, you also adopt the management philosophy behind that tool. And so you need to understand like where it works and where it might not necessarily work either. So to be able to say, okay, I'm using this product and it's helping with my inflammation, but I'm also aggressively attacking it with my licensed massage therapist or my chiropractor or another kind of healer. But plant-based medicine is profound and it brings a lot of amazing and powerful and talented healers together. And that's the other side of the engagement. Because it really truly brings people of all walks of life and all backgrounds. And you can understand that this is, its liberty is something that everybody.
I appreciate you being here to educate me. I'd love to have more members get educated because just the conversations that we had around the subject, I could tell that people really don't understand
They
how
don't.
much.
They don't, but that's okay. We'll keep having
Keep offering.
we'll
Yep.
keep having the conversations and we'll keep offering the resources and the literature and the engagement. Because I do truly believe and know deep down that education is the key to all of this. And I appreciate everybody who was willing to listen.
Thank you. I think we have another talk scheduled for March.
Yeah.
So that talk was put in our program guide, which has much more outreach.
Yep.
So we're looking forward to that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do it'll be a deeper dive. I think we're gonna have different foci of these education series. But thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming.
I thought I knew a lot, but I always learn every time.
So I'll stop this somehow. Get the
I
recording
thought
to
you were
you.
familiar, we've never met, but I sent my wife to you. and
Oh,
talked about-
yeah.
She loved